you talked about it. You were a big fan, but you're a younger fan. What was your biggest takeaway?
It's kind of one of those, the old saying, you don't want to meet your heroes.
So if you're essentially under 30, you really didn't see this guy, and the first thing we see is, well, anybody watch this crap?
There's been other attempts at doing something like this, none that have ever gotten to the level that I think this achieves.
4 hours and 10 minutes of Dale Earnhardt.
It absolutely is. And in some ways, which I know we'll get into, didn't feel like enough. Oh, so better and better. It's aging like a fine wine, my man. That was some good work on your part.
It really is. It sounds good. You know what? And talk about sounding good. We're getting ready to talk about something that sounded good. The soundtrack randomly for this movie was really good. Our song would have fit perfectly
Right
in
in
the
it.
soundtrack for the
Yeah.
Earnhardt documentary.
Right in that time frame. It's incredible.
Yes.
Oh, everything ties back to it. It's so good. But
So good.
excited to be back on with you, Mr. Doug Marsh, sitting alongside Rob Stott and diving back into the Twisted Eras podcast, and uh, a unique one because it's not something we've done. We haven't taken this kind of approach to something yet. We've looked at movies, we've looked at music, we've looked at entire years on a calendar,
Right.
but reviewing something in essence, looking back
Yeah.
at something that came out today in this
Mhm.
era, and but it's something that spans many generations for sure, in a topic.
Yeah.
And if you're watching, the big three on my head probably is a dead giveaway. But we're talking about a topic that I probably, when I think back to it, the early days of our conversations as colleagues
Sure.
revolved around NASCAR.
It did.
So this is it's kind of like a full circle moment here where we get to sit down and talk about the guy that defined the sport.
It really does. And we do have, you can go back and listen. We have an episode of NASCAR that's great, but this will be specifically based on the new, Amazon, documentary that came out, gosh, half, I guess, right before Memorial Day, and the other half right after. And as of this recording, when this comes out, it's still a top 10 show in Amazon, and
It's
they're
all
getting
there.
they're getting great, feedback and
The
great
helpful thing
viewership.
too, I think this is the first year. I could be wrong in that, but I feel like this is the first year Amazon's all these streaming services are picking up
Sure.
sports left and right. Right, they want their
Yeah.
live entertainment aspect. Netflix has wrestling. You've seen football on Amazon on
John. Yeah.
Thursdays. NASCAR added to
They
the
did.
Amazon slate. So
They
it's
did.
been a nice little tie-in for them to be able to go from Nashville on a Sunday night, and then you get, hey, if you happen to be streaming along and watching along, the second half of the Earnhardt documentary played right
That's
after.
right. It did.
So
It did. No, and when they announced, I guess a year or so ago, that NASCAR was going to let a streaming service take over for 5 races for the first time, Amazon's like, okay, what do we do? And hey, let's go and have this great tie-in of this, you know, icon of the sport, and we'll put it out perfectly when our season starts. When we start showing races, and so yeah, they did they timed it up perfectly, and if for we've talked a lot of movies, but Imagine Entertainment put it together, which is Ron Howard's group
mhm.
with him and Brian Grazer, who made iconic movies through the years. So like when you see the Imagine logo, it's like this is legit.
Yeah,
And then they got the rights. NASCAR Studios was a co-producer, so they have the access to all sorts of different footage, and they just compiled and compiled and compiled, and it's something. It's mammoth. I put the numbers together in preparation for this, and I show it at 4 hours and 10 minutes worth of Dale Earnhardt.
yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And in some ways, which I know we'll get into,
Mhm.
but didn't feel like enough. So, yeah,
Yeah. It's we don't want to don't give away
no.
the ending, but we do want to highlight some of the the episodes. But then we had some questions at the end, and it's even to be that long.
Right.
There's probably stuff it's missing.
The pace of it, roughly an hour each. Some were
Mhm.
a little bit longer, some a
Mhm.
little less. Well, I should say three of them were an hour. One was an hour and 10.
One was an
Um,
hour 10. Hmm.
but the pace of it was cool. It sort of broke up his life into different segments or eras, if you will, of kind of
Yeah,
what he went through. So from a holistic standpoint, just it feels like a recap of, hey, what'd you think happens at the end? But
yeah,
what, like, coming out of it, how did you feel about it?
yeah. I thought the pacing was great. I love the way that it told the story in parts. So you honestly, you could take it. You could sit there for 4 hours and 10 minutes, or
Yeah,
you could invest an hour and see the early 80s, and you
yeah,
could invest an hour and see the late 80s and early 90s, and then you could invest an hour and see the late 90s, and then you could invest an hour and see the end.
yeah.
And they had, just like I say, so much footage mixed with the modern.
Yeah,
Obviously Dale and Kelly are going to be in there, but you get Dale and Kelly, but you also get lots of Richard Childress. They leaned on Kyle Petty, and I think maybe
Daryl
Rusty
Waltrip.
Wallace. Daryl's in there a
Yep.
bunch, and you just got
His crew Doug Reichert, friend,
the
crew chief.
original the
Yeah.
original crew chief of
Yep.
the number two Osterlin car. Reichert is
Yep.
on there. His aunts are
Yeah.
those are
Yeah.
those are modern interviews with
Sister.
Dale's sisters. Yeah,
Yep.
with Junior's aunts. And then you mix it with archive footage of mom, his Dale's mom, who's no
Yep.
longer with us, and obviously,
Dad.
not
Yep.
going to not going to get into this too much, but they use archive footage from Teresa. There is
Yeah.
obviously no modern footage.
Yep.
I've got to think they asked her, and she probably
Declined. Yeah.
politely declined. And
Right.
but she's definitely a major character throughout the entire thing. So,
Which
but
that's one of those, you kind of forget why the situation is the way it is until you
ooh,
go back and watch it, right? That's
yeah,
for me. That wasn't, as a kid around that time when all that was happening, and it wasn't like the first thing I thought of. But yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, you go through it and you realize that she's not physically in it.
right,
From a new modern perspective, but you
yeah,
get, you don't get JR Motorsports without kind of
yeah.
the
The
de-evolution or
split, yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
that. But
I guess
crazy.
technically the last footage we have of her is from the Hall of Fame in 2010, and that was
Yeah,
the most current video they used of her. But yeah, huge. It's interesting. Obviously, Dale can't be in it,
right.
but they
But they did
have
a lot
all
of
sorts of
great, yeah, the archive interviews with him.
so
It's
many
so
archive
good.
interviews, and you can tell a bunch of it's B-roll,
Yeah,
and that may have never even been seen
right.
before. And I mean, it literally opens it up with him explaining. He's like, I don't care, just what are you gonna do? And he's like, yeah, ain't nobody watching this crap. If that's all you're doing, you better do something better than that, because
Right.
nobody's watching this. And that's the first thing we get. It's
Yep.
like, I know
Oh,
I've heard Junior talk about one of the reasons making this is almost 25 years. So if you're essentially under 30, you really didn't see this guy, and he's just this mythic figure that this character that you don't know. And the first thing you do, he's kind of being a
dick.
jerk. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
And so it's
Yeah.
like, let's say the first thing we want, yeah, I know who this is, and oh, the three is so cool. And our friend Cletus McFarland, who's got, good gosh, 4 million different viewers, always ends your show with "Do It for Dale," and you
Yep.
get all this, and the first thing we see is, well, nobody
I
watch this
don't know. This is
crap. If
crap.
that's what you're doing, you better do something better than that. And I'm like, wow,
Just
that is him, man.
it,
He is
yeah. It's like
abrasive and
it's
whew,
raw. It's
it
real.
is, it is, it
And
is.
yeah, it's awesome. And that was kind of my, we talked a bit about this a little bit before. For me, just the general takeaway of it is that, I felt like I knew him. You mentioned that age is
Yep,
probably perfect that you mentioned 30 and below. You probably don't know this
yep,
guy. So
yep.
sitting here 37, had formative, not necessarily formative, my
Oh,
younger years, right? Like of
yeah,
watching him and not like a blip in terms of his entire career. So for me, it was neat to, someone that obviously cared about. Like
Hmm. Sure.
an entire room downstairs. I wish I could be doing this from that room with all the stuff I have down there.
Right.
But you know, meant a lot. Felt like I knew a lot, but this was like also an educational experience for me because there's been other attempts at doing something like this, none
Absolutely.
that have ever gotten to the level that I think this achieves, and
You
that's
know,
what's
not
awesome to me.
not to this length
Mm-mm.
of stuff. There would have
No,
been nothing, nothing
there's been
this.
like Hollywoodizations of his life. There's
Sure,
been
sure.
just
There's
true
been there's
attempts
been a
at
couple.
documentary, right?
Yep, yeah. Oh yeah.
But
There's a couple of like I say, we'll get to that at the
yeah,
end,
yeah,
But
yep,
yes, the sheer magnitude of how big it was,
yeah,
and I will say this: he's there my essentially my whole life. I am six in '79, in '80, and I become a fan in '86. I was 12, turning 13 years old. That's when I started pulling for him, and then I go in '87, which is in the documentary, "The Pass in the Grass." We've talked about that. I'm there that day, and so that cements the fact that this is my guy. And so I root for him essentially from that point forward.
yep,
So I knew most of this. I was trying to go back and it's like, what in here that I did not know. And
yep,
there are some things, and we'll talk about them, later on. But as far as like the origination, it's let's just go into the first episode.
yeah.
If we're diving into
Take it.
the Ironhead, which they talk, episode one is Ironhead, which was his dad was Ironheart because
Yep.
he never gave up and all this, and he was Ironhead because he wrecked everybody, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yep.
you get this, and it's just so deep in how young he is there, and you get this great. It's a local sports guys doing a piece on him, and he's in this normal house, and his dog is Killer. I was like, it's like my dog's name's Killer. I'm
Killer.
like, oh, that's amazing. Dale has a dog named Killer, and you get this. It's iconic. And once again, there was a documentary made on him in '81. It's called One Tough Customer, and I think Wrangler had picked him up that year, and Wrangler's ad slogan was One Tough Customer, and so somebody made a 30-minute. I don't even know where they would have shown this thing, documentary, essentially of Dale at the World 600 1981.
Yep.
And a lot of the footage in this episode that you see is from that documentary.
Yeah.
And that documentary has this amazing scene with Junior water skiing, and it rips him. It takes him too far
Rip
in
the
on this
butt.
on the
Yeah.
cement, and it rips his butt. It's a great,
Yeah.
great video, but that's from that original documentary, and so you get this all these amazing shots and stuff like that, and they're building it up through. They they got good video of the races.
Hmm.
There's a shot of Riverside, which Riverside was this great, you know, road course in the California desert that they last raced at in '88. They
Wow.
they destroyed it, and so it shows him, racing there, and it's just such good stuff. But the one thing that jumped out to me, you feel personal stories about this. You're looking for that personal story. You've got his signature on his cap. There was
Yeah.
at some point in time, he was there with that cap signing his name. Well, there's a part in the first episode. You get shots of the Wrangler car, and that beautiful blue and yellow car is so gorgeous, and there
That
is
one?
a there. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one. It's so beautiful, so beautiful.
Yeah.
So there's this shot, and it shows it's from the outside of a garage, and it's looking in the garage bay, and there inside is that beautiful car. Well, that's the original RCR shop. It's on the corner of Old Lexington Road and Gumtree. That building is still there.
Wow.
So my I get married in 1999, and we build a little house out in that area. Our house was like 3.5 miles from that. And when you went by, it was just one of those things that was like,
It's there.
that's
There
the
it
old that's the old RCR shop,
is.
and somebody else, and he moves, and there's a picture of that in one of the later episodes. But somebody else bought that, and they kept it as a garage. It's still there today as a garage,
That's awesome.
with this lineage to the original, RCR shop. And so when that image came up, it was like oh my gosh, this is great. So in the first episode, that was the one that jumped out to me really heavily. The only other thing that I can, I wrote down a few things from that episode, but there's something that if you go back and watch it at 42 minutes and 45 seconds, there is a picture of Dale and he's in the car and he's drinking a Pepsi.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was
Right.
like,
Whoops. The
I
Coke
don't
didn't
think
review
I've
this.
ever seen
I
Dale
mean, he
Earnhardt with a
was like
Pepsi.
iconically
I
with Coca-Cola.
iconic Coke.
Yeah.
I imagine you didn't have them in Philly, but here in North Carolina, our Coke machines had him on it.
Oh
And there's
yeah,
an
they
image.
existed.
Did you have them too? Yes. And so
Yeah.
you're like, oh my goodness.
Hmm.
So when I actually paused it because I busted out laughing. I
That's
was
so
like,
good. That's a
it's just
great
got a
catch.
Pepsi cup,
That's a great catch. Also, I could be wrong, but there might have been some Gatorade drank throughout this thing.
There
And
was a
Gatorade is a Pepsi product. Is that am I right in that, or
um
is it Coke?
uh it's not I don't know if it's either. One of them
This is gonna
made
be a quick lookup.
Powerade.
PepsiCo.
Who
It's a Gatorade company, or
Gatorade,
Pep
Gatorade,
Gatorade is a
PepsiCo bought
PepsiCo
Gatorade.
company.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's another one.
So
Later on, it would have been Powerade, which is
right,
probably a Coke product.
right, right.
But
This
that
is
that
wild.
just jumped out. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's
He's
him
got a
with a
Pepsi.
cup, got a Pepsi cup. Um,
Was it actually Pepsi, or was it like the Pepsi, one of those
well,
like
it
wax
was one of those.
cups?
Yes, one of those
Yeah.
beautiful '80s era that you got. When you went to the ball field or whatever. That's what he's drinking out of.
All right.
He would tell you he's drinking Coke out of it, but
Right. He would.
I
Absolutely.
know. But those
Well,
were the things like in that first episode that really jumped out at me.
the line that stuck, and I was doing the same. I knowing we were going to be doing this, I sat through it and had my notes app open, so I
Hmm.
was like, capturing things as I was going, and the line really early on in that episode, we already mentioned about Mr. Reichert.
Hmm.
If you want to get the essence of who he was on the track too, he was cut, and I guess off. It probably applies to real life as well. The line was he was comfortable being out of control, and that stood out to me as like the perfect definition of the type of person that he was.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, you don't get an Ironhead nickname if you're not,
No.
bumping into people. And you think
Right.
the line from Days of Thunder, Rubbin's Racing, like that was Dale.
Yeah.
So knowing that and hearing that come from a good friend slash, the
Yeah.
guy that was one of his first crew chiefs, that stood out to
That's
me.
yeah. That's a great.
Yeah.
That's a great line. You also in that episode, there's a very iconic picture of the Richmond, where he in other documentaries they've got the whole thing. He actually calls into Childress and tells them someone had blown an engine, I think, in front of him,
Mm.
and there's just oil
Yeah.
everywhere, and he can't see a thing. He's like Richard, I got to come down. I got to come down the pits,
Yeah.
and he tells him, no, you can't. You can't lose the track position. And he's like, well, I'm going to be
Okay.
off the radio for about a minute. I'll be right back. And this iconic image
Oh
of
my
him
God. Leaning out the
hanging out of
car.
the side of the car. It's incredible.
Scrubbing it off. Oh my God.
Scrubbing off
It's
this
unbelievable.
crud. And oh my goodness, so you have that. I mean, that's just iconic.
This is probably the episode I learned the most in about him too.
Yeah, fair.
I always, because obviously this is a portion I'm not alive for to
Right.
begin with, but also like I knew of the rivalry that existed between him and Daryl.
Yeah.
Didn't realize how deep seated and still potentially upset DW is at Dale for being the type
Yeah.
of racer that he was.
Yeah. So
And it kind of, to me, that's like almost represent. It was like a precursor to what Dale and Jeff became, because it was
somewhat.
like less the racing, right? I know
Right.
their styles are different, but it
Sure.
was really the person, right? Like Dale is
Yeah.
that homegrown, like this is what I do. I get up, I grind my gears. I'm a blue collar,
Yes.
blue collar. I'm gonna work on my car guy, and
Yeah.
that's what I'm not gonna change for the sport. Whereas Daryl really represented that sort of like slick back hair and wanting to be the face of it, and like
Yeah.
not caring so much about the racing aspect. And yeah, it was just like interesting to really get that perspective. One sided, obviously, because you're
Sure.
getting Daryl's take on it, DW's take on it, but
Well,
um, yeah, it's just
and
real
that's a
interesting.
great, the Daryl stuff, and once again, it's out there. You can watch
Yeah,
the entire race, and it went on for a while. They it was very upset. He wrecks him, and Daryl was
regular.
upset
Yeah,
because he could have gotten hurt. And when you right hook somebody dead
yeah,
into the fence, it's a short track. It doesn't matter. And it just could not believe he would right hook him
into
in that
yeah.
in that spot. That's not rubbing his racing. That
No, that
is
is aggressive, and
intentional where
yeah.
you can actually get hurt. And so that was, there's a whole that's a great part as well. And they highlighted it, but you can make an entire documentary about that
Mhm.
race. The whole idea,
Yeah.
because it went on, and it had some of the fans afterwards to review it, and they're like,
Well,
those
and
people were furious,
that too,
man.
like that side of it, like I understood, obviously knowing his eventual nickname of being the Intimidator and that
Sure,
sort of thing, and like the Dale I knew and followed had a massive fan base behind him. If you
sure,
really dive into it, he did not those
not
early
at all.
days. So he was
Mm,
very much sort of almost like, as polarizing as like Kyle Busch is today, or
he he
was last
he
couple of years,
was. That's a,
right?
that's a great that's a great way to look at it. The fact that, granted, in the next episode we'll go deeper, but I went to that '87 race and bought my first Earnhardt shirt, and he did nothing that day. Nothing. That Bill Elliott just dominates, and then they have a 10-lap shootout at the end. He takes advantage. He gets into Elliott. Elliott gets into Bodine, and next thing you know, they're beating the crap out of each other, and you get the pass in the grass. And
Yep.
I think it was 13, um, and I'm putting my shirt on and I'm celebrating, and grown people are yelling and cursing at me. And it was the first time that had ever happened as a kid. You're like, I'm a
What
kid, man. What are you, what,
what
what are
did
you
I
yelling
do?
at? What are you yelling and cursing at me? Like,
Yeah.
they hated him. And this isn't Charlotte. This is right down the road
His
from
backyard.
Kannapolis.
Yeah.
It was his backyard. And so that's, I was sitting with a friend of mine today who would be much younger generation, under 30 as well, who does not know Earnhardt, in this sense, does not understand the fascination with him, the whole idea of why did everybody love this guy? And I have to tell him, it's like they really didn't. It
Yeah.
took a while. And as I told him, and we'll find out in the next episode, winning cures everything, man.
It really does.
People
It really
love
does. Winners.
winners.
Hmm.
And the first episode, ends with the 5-win, season, and Daryl's looking perfect. He's got beautiful hair, and he's sitting there and he's just like, I'm just worried about the sport with Earnhardt as our champion. And it was like, little did you know, dude,
What it would
you and
be.
everybody else is getting ready to get way
Right.
richer because of this
Of this
guy,
guy.
and that's the way episode one kind of ended.
Yeah.
But
It's true because if you look at it that way, I could understand and appreciate why people didn't. Because if you have that sort of aggressive streak on the track and you're not winning and it's not resulting in any like, you're putting people in danger, right?
mhm. Oh yeah,
It's very much a like what the heck is going on, not knowing obviously how, having futuristic sight and being able to foretell what's going to happen. Uh, things change, but like in that moment, he's a nobody essentially,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I
They're
mean,
they're
rookie of the
they're
year
all
and whatnot, but like,
but they're all kind of regional heroes, and
yeah,
they're getting ready to become national heroes,
yeah,
and it's going to happen in a few years. And they're probably making 150 grand a year, and they're going to be making a couple of $1 million a year here shortly. And
all
it's
of a sudden,
all of a sudden, and they didn't
yeah,
even, and it's because of this crazy guy who, as Daryl said, I'm just not sure I want this guy leading us into the future. It's like, boy, that
well,
that was
I
that was wrong.
don't think they had a
Yeah,
choice.
yeah,
So that does it
but
takes you to episode 2.
yeah, which they called the Intimidator, which,
Yep.
they asked him about it at one point in time, and almost like he shied away. Like, yeah,
Yeah, you didn't
they gave
really.
that to me. I had nothing to do with that. I don't want
That
anything.
that
It
was a
was almost,
shocking. That was a
yeah,
note I took. Is like I thought it was something he embraced, and he was like, "Well, no,
yeah.
it's not really. It wasn't my call. They're just saying
It
it,
was
and
very
I'm doing
interesting.
it."
It's like, oh yeah, they gave that to me. I was like,
Yeah. Did
well,
they?
that's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so I looked it up. So obviously, episode 2 opens with the pass in the grass that I was talking
Yep.
about. And I'm there that day. But his '87, he wins 11 points races and one All Star, so 12 wins. and he wins 76 total.
Mhm.
So 15% of
That
his
year.
wins are that year.
Wow, that's a
So
massive
that's
number.
how dominant he is. Now he's got a 9 win season in like 90,
Hmm.
but yeah, they just dominate, that year. It's incredible, and they're so dominant they kind of glossed over it. It was kind
Yeah,
of like
yeah,
because it was going to be a struggle in '88 and '89, and it was like they wanted to talk about the struggle, not this amazing success.
right.
That was something else that was kind of interesting. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
well, the '87 year they just and it's kind of
No one,
it's
right? It was like
it's
everyone had the
there, it's
sophomore
there,
slump,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, it's there, but they're showing pictures of me smiling with trophy, and there's another smiling with trophy, and it was kind of like, yeah, we just went out and destroyed them all, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, yeah, but
But they wanted to
and then
get
it's
to
like,
that.
yeah, they want to get to the extra stuff because then it shows him winning that '87 Winston Cup trophy, and junior's 13 that year,
Yep.
and he goes up to and it's this great shot, and he's sitting there on the side, and he's like, get out the shot, boy, he's like and I'm like, dude, this is so bad.
Yeah.
It's like he's just standing there on the side. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's great. You got yours. Now get out. We're gonna get other people in here."
It's amazing. Oh my God. Well,
Oh,
yeah, there's a lot to unpack too, and
hmm.
from a familial perspective with him, because that's the side of it I think a lot of people aren't as familiar with, and like watching the sacrifices, we'll call them, that he made to be as great as he
Yeah,
was, and the
yeah,
the toll it took on
yeah.
first marriage, which I don't think Jennifer
Very.
does it get into it in this one
It's
or
in
the
there
third
for
one.
about
Yeah, just
two
a little bit.
seconds. Yes,
And
because they do bring
drops the
care
kids, or she takes the kids, that's right, and goes and has a new husband, but then they come back. They can't afford to have them.
with the fire and all that stuff.
Yeah,
I think that's in the first episode. But
yeah,
yeah, the whole idea of the
just
fire and
he takes them
but
in, and
yeah, but this episode is when Carrie, the
yep,
first son, shows
gets
back up.
introduced. Yep.
And the really fascinating thing is if you listen to Carrie, and Carrie's done a lot of podcasts and stuff like that, but in this he talked about is his upbringing is not bad.
Mm-mm.
His stepfather loves him, and
Yep.
he multiple times called him his father. And
Yeah.
he says his father Jack because he wants you to make sure
Right.
he's not
There's
talking
the
about
distinction.
his biological
Yep.
father. He's talking about his adopted father.
Which,
And
by the way,
yeah.
whether you knew it or not, you don't even have to say
Oh, dude.
biological. He is a
He
spitting image, and it's
he
unbelievable.
of the three kids,
He looks
he is
the
by
absolute most
far
like
the
him.
most. Yes, it is unreal. But that jumped out to me as like he didn't
Yeah.
seem like he had that bad a childhood where
No.
Junior's is terrible.
I
You
I've
know,
seen, the crazy thing is I've seen them all race. I saw Carrie at an ARCA race, if I recall,
nice.
in Pocono. So I've seen all of the Earnhardts at one point or another on a track, which is just
That's awesome.
cool to think about too.
There was a really rough scene in this particular one where Junior talks about being sent
To the
to
military academy.
military
Yep.
school, and he goes to Oak Ridge, which is still open.
Yep.
It's just west of Greensboro. It's not far from here, uh, but just devastating to be left. And then there's a scene where they're asking Dale about, hey, what's going on, and he says, yeah, everything's good. He says, Dale Jr. is at Oak Ridge, and Teresa and I are happy. And I was like,
Yeah.
there are two
Oh,
separate things,
right.
but secretly, and it was like, dude,
Yep.
man, that is just
Well,
hard,
the other side of it too, and I don't think I ever realized. I don't know if you did either, but the tightness of the relationship between
Wow.
Kelly and Dale Jr. and
Pretty
you
powerful,
know
isn't it?
the awesome to see, like, just walks outside one day and sees her in full uniform. She's like, "Yeah, I'm here. I want to be here
Yeah.
with you." Like, that
And
is awesome. That is
she
so
left her high
awesome
school. She
to
left
go
her high
there.
school
Yeah, her
to go
friends
there.
and everything, and just to
It's crazy.
yeah.
It's
Um,
crazy, but
and
yeah, that was
that's a relationship that obviously, without getting into the next ones, like, plays out throughout the entire, 4-part series, if you will, of just
yeah.
what they mean to each other and how
Yeah,
they're looking out for each other.
we we all know Dale Jr. is the athlete, the race car driver, whatever you want to call him, but she is like
She's the brains.
she is
Yeah.
she is the standout in this
Yeah.
whole documentary. She is just amazing, and it's like, you know, Dale Jr. becomes a good person eventually with all the crap that he goes through, and
Hmm.
we'll make some revelations at the end. But she is the standout in this thing of
Yeah.
everything, and one of the things that's amazing in this particular episode is she talks about, hey, I graduated high school and I was gone, and I don't know if you were paying attention, but she went to the greatest school in the world, the University of North Carolina at
Wilmington.
Wilmington.
Yep.
And at about 43 minutes and 41 seconds of this documentary, it starts showing shots of the campus of UNCW, and they're from that time. I'm not saying they're her. I don't know where they got this footage of, but it's showing all these kids moving in. And what does it show? But it shows a kid moving into Belk Hall, which is where Doug lived.
That's awesome. How
So
cool is
I'm
that?
sitting here. I stopped that thing and started screaming. It's like, oh my gosh! And so I lived in that building for 2 years, but it was
Wow.
like, and she's a year older, so she gets
I
there
was
a year before I do.
gonna say
So
you
it's
overlap.
so she
Yeah.
lived there obviously the year before I did because I knew everybody in there. There wasn't an Earnhardt in our building because I think I would have
You would have
known.
known.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was still fascinating to see. She is there. I think we had one class together that she may have dropped. And the only reason I remember that was because there was a sign-in sheet. And the guy on the first day of class, she wrote your name, and he just used that the rest of the time. And I think,
Should have taken
three
that
quarters of
signer
yeah,
sheet.
yeah, yeah, three-quarters of the way through, I realized I was like the person who was no longer sitting in front of me that was supposed to be sitting in her was Kelly Earnhardt. And so
Oh,
I'm like,
that's so cool.
yeah. And so it's one of those things. And like, and she
Wow.
mentioned, she's there for 3 years and he doesn't make her come home, but
Right.
he entices her to come home. And so
Yep.
she does. And so that would have made sense that, she left that particular class. But it's, it was that episode, that particular episode had a couple things that jumped out. But when they start
That's
showing UNCW in the early 90s, I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, that's amazing
that's
right there.
phenomenal.
Yeah, it's. I know we need to go on to the next episode, or we're going to have a podcast as long as the actual documentary was. But there were a couple of lines in this particular one that you talked about writing down stuff. There was a couple of lines in the backside of this documentary that I just was wow. And the first one was Dale Jr. was like, hey, at military school,
Yeah.
Dad or Teresa never reached out to him,
Yeah.
and I was like,
That's
how is that even possible? How do you ship your kid off and then
and
not
not say a word. I
it,
don't well that line, but then related to it, them say like, do they even want me? Or like,
do
something
they?
along like,
Yes,
why are they doing that type of thing? Oh man.
it
Um,
was gut
yeah,
wrenching,
that
man.
was really interesting. Um,
And I just, you could still tell. I mean, he's a 50-year-old man, and you could still tell how much that hurt. And it
mhm.
still seems like it still messes with him. But the other iconic line in that backside is they showed the great, North Wilkesboro wreck between Ricky Rudd and him, and essentially loses him the championship to Rusty in 1989. And Chocolate Myers, his
Mhm.
longtime gas man, is being interviewed. This is a modern interview. This wasn't an old
Yeah.
interview, and he goes, "I wrote this down word for word because I wanted to make sure because it jumped off the screen." He said Dale could dish it out, but he couldn't
Couldn't
take it.
take it. Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it was like,
Yeah.
what a revelation. And he's not wrong, but it's still the fact that, he said that about, this is his guy,
I don't want to
but
call it a defense, but that situation, I don't think anyone could have taken that, right? As far as like dishing out the intimidator factor and the rubbing
yeah,
and the bumping and the wrecking.
yeah.
They didn't
Well,
show they didn't show Dale in a situation where his wreck ultimately resulted in DW losing a championship.
right.
Did they?
And no, well, and see, but the funny thing is Ricky Rudd in that wreck will tell you it's his fault. He's the one that wrecked them both,
Yeah.
and he would never take credit because to this day they didn't talk after that, and they had
Oh,
been fairly good friends. And I think Ricky says that before he passed, they had mended fences, but it went decades before they talked again because of that
That
particular day.
incident. Hmm.
Yeah, but it was, but it's no different than him wrecking, Terry at Bristol when
Yeah.
the whole iconic. I didn't mean to wreck him. I meant rattle his cage, and he's got this huge smile on his face. And it's like,
Oh
and I
boy,
was
yeah, he
like,
did.
well, yeah. So, but
Yeah,
that line just it really jumped out at me,
couldn't take it.
and the episode ended with something I did not remember, and Neil Bonnet in that beautiful 31 Goodrich
Oh,
car, and he was working for CBS at the time, so he's doing the interview. I was like, oh yeah, we're running along well. The next thing you know, he goes flying almost into the stands, and that's the way the
hits the
episode
catch
ends.
fence.
I was
Oh
like,
man.
oh
My
my
God.
goodness, I did not
Was that the
remember
one?
that.
That's the wreck where he gets out of the car and then goes back to the commentary
He
booth.
went he went to the commentary booth.
Like, I got a better seat
Yes,
here.
it was unreal. But yeah,
So unreal.
that's how
Oh,
episode 2 ended, and
yeah.
when we
Well, interesting segue too to the next one, right? Because you
yeah.
talk about that wreck and what Neil went through. And then I didn't start catching on to it until that episode. How
Hmm.
they were bookending things with the start and finish of each
Oh
episode,
yeah, 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 yeah,
because
yeah,
they
yeah.
the next one starts and it's all about I think they talk about the difficulty of the sport, and what you get
Oh
in a car,
yeah,
you never know. um
yes.
and it ends that way with that episode, Neil's crash, and then the next episode is kind of just the full circle of Neil and
Yeah,
and what it meant to Dale, like their friendship and everything. And it was a unique, the way it was structured too. From episode, the whole thing was awesome to me.
yeah.
But even from episode to episode, how they took that segment of his life and made
They're
it
perfect
full
cuts,
circle.
right?
Yeah,
Perfect cuts.
to watch
Yeah,
it on its own.
the first thing I wrote for part 3, which they called One Tough Customer, which I said is
Hmm.
based on that,
Yep. Commercial.
original documentary and ad,
Yep.
exactly, commercial, was Dale was on Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah.
I was like, I
He was
bust out laughing. I
everywhere,
was
huh?
like,
Late night and this and
there's
that.
Oprah introducing Dale Earnhardt. I was like, are you kidding? And then as they're talking, they're showing the troubles and stuff like that. They were talking about, Daytona Rex and all this
Yep.
crazy stuff. And you get Motorhead's Ace of Spades. It's just an iconic rock
Yep.
song. And that's when I jumped out. I was like, man, this soundtrack is
Good.
amazing.
Yep.
The Twisted Airs theme song would be perfect in here.
Hmm.
But and then this episode's gonna be famous and because of one thing. And they've already talked about, like, I don't at the race in Nashville, they were talking about, certain they were talking about the race or something like that.
Right.
And gosh, I can't remember her name. Please forgive me. I apologize. But she said she was just glad that he didn't go to art school, And so you get the quote of the documentary. He's like, "Are you freaking out of your mind?" He says,
Yeah.
"I'm not going
Coming
to
to
art
art school
school.
because he
Like I'm
draws
an
stock
art
cars.
student. I'm not into art. I'm not an art student." It was
Look
like
at the subject matter,
he
like not what
was,
I'm
yes. It Oh my gosh, it was
going to art.
hilarious. But
Oh,
she said that this past week in the post race, that it's like, hey, I'm just glad you didn't go to art school.
yeah, it was amazing.
Oh
The,
man.
I feel like it's potentially a controversial aspect of him and the the kid dad relationship, because
Hmm.
I, for one, am a fan of the approach. Not the absenteeism, right? Like, of being fully committed to NASCAR and not being there and that sort of thing, but the way in which he encouraged or didn't encourage them to get into racing, and
Right.
wanting them to forge their own path and not
Right.
handing it to them. That to
Yeah.
me is, I love that about him.
Yeah.
The fact that he wasn't going to say, Junior, go get in a car. Here's everything you need. Go do it.
Yeah.
Now, eventually they show that, him giving them all three a car so that they can
Yeah.
go and form a team and all that sort of stuff. But that was after, letting them struggle, letting them figure
Yeah.
out their way. Is it what they want to do? Because that's the exact same freaking experience he had.
It
And,
was. It
I mean,
was.
it worked for
I
him.
was. It did. I did love the Hank Parker, his buddy, his bass fishing buddy.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, that's what happened to me." He's like, "Yeah, Dale, you got 30 cars, and
Right.
you know, $50 million in the bank.
Right.
You probably shouldn't have your children going down to the
Yeah,
junkyard to
right, to
pull.
pick cars,
Yeah,
so,
it's like,
right, and
and he's
parts.
like,
Yeah, not
you've
wrong.
got a
It's his
point
reputation
there.
too, right? It was when
Yeah,
he
yeah.
realized like what they were doing, having his last name was going to impact his outlook.
Ah,
The way people looked at him. That's when he
you,
gets involved. That's something. I get it,
you
but
know,
at the
there was
same
a neat,
time,
yeah,
it's
but there's another neat part about that particular scene where, Carrie pops in and he's like,
hmm
he's like, yeah, Dale Jr. had a go-kart and he sold it and we had some money. We went to the junkyard, we bought an old Monte Carlo, and he says, he starts talking about who helps him with it. Is it Dale? No, it's not Dale. He makes sure to let you know it's his dad, Jack,
yeah,
jumps in, helps him with the roll cages. He's teaching him stuff about the car. And it's like, where is the man in black? Where's the Intimidator? Where's
right.
Ironhead? These kids are out here and who's helping him? It's his adopted dad,
Right.
and that was,
Well,
oh,
it's
man.
the other side of that same coin. So I say I love the
Yeah,
approach he took. The other side of that is, everything that he didn't want his dad to be for him, he ended up being for his
he
kids too,
did. That was
right?
that was a
Which is
pretty
unfortunate.
powerful statement as
Yeah.
well when he said, he wanted nothing more than the acceptance of his father, yet
hmm
he couldn't give it to his own children.
Yep.
And it was like, oof,
Yep.
man, it's powerful stuff. And he's mentioning to them, he's like, yeah, I just don't think they're very good. I don't know if Dale Jr. is very good. And Junior
Oh,
says,
have
I
you
ran
ever seen?
159 late model races. And as
Have you
far
ever?
as I am aware,
Yep.
my dad has never watched
One.
one.
Right.
And I wrote down, how is that possible?
hmm
How are you not going to these things with your kids involved? It's
Right.
just, oh man,
Yeah, that was
you
another
know,
one. That's like
sheesh.
you have to imagine like you could accidentally bump into him at one
You
of them
would
when there's
think,
that many, right? The fact that
it's
he
like,
hadn't been to
oh,
any,
we're
yeah,
we're
that's rough.
racing here. Yeah. Well, what if you're racing an hour down the road? You can get in the car and drive down an hour and see your kids running their cars. I
Right.
just,
Like what was he
that
doing?
was what was he doing
Yeah,
exactly? And
right.
he's most likely making money somewhere,
Right.
because that's what
Well,
that
then
that was
you get
fascinating
into the
too.
appearances and stuff, right? Which I know
Hmm.
that plays a bigger part in the last episode and the impact on the guy on my hat. But
Yeah.
um, the I don't know that they necessarily like it. He probably was at appearances, was out, on a late night show, traveling to promote NASCAR, do something along those
Hmm.
lines, and um, you know, without that, you you have to make the correlation that like without him committing his time to that, do the kids have what they have? Right. So
Right.
like
It's
there's
it's
sacrifice
tough.
somewhere, and it's a really I don't know that I could have made that call.
No.
But
It's
that's
that's an interesting point because Kelly mentions that a couple of times. Is like, yeah, it was hard, but it actually made her who she is today.
right.
And her son races too, and she's at every single one.
Mhm.
She would never not be there, and
Right.
so um,
Yeah, it's
you kind of
crazy.
learn lessons in that sense. But yeah, interesting. I think this was the longest
It
episode. This was
was.
the
This
one
was the
that was
the
the extra.
1 hour and 11 minutes
The
officially.
extra, yeah, the extra time, and you had the whole. And what's funny is like this one ends with him struggling. He
Mhm.
struggles, and this is the
He's
birth
getting
of
old.
Gordon
Gordon.
and
Yep.
him getting older,
Yep.
and he struggles in 95 and 96 and 97. He wrecks again. He has a horrible wreck
Yep.
there at Daytona, and
The
they're just like,
flip.
oh yeah,
He's
and
never
then he
going to win it.
passes out.
Yep.
Then he passes
Yeah.
out at Darlington, which I did not remember this
I
story.
I vaguely did. It was like one of those things like I had forgotten about it, but when I
Yeah,
watched it, I do remember, that happening. Not distinctly detailed as they give you here, but
right.
I do remember that happening.
But
But yeah, still a
man,
crazy situation that
it
like
was, and
you
you
wonder.
got the press conference with the doctor saying, yeah, we don't know what happened.
Mm,
We don't. It can happen
we're gonna
again. It may
clean
not
him.
happen. And he's just
We're
in the
gonna clean
back
him.
like this, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
racing.
yeah. It's like, yeah, you're gonna say what I want you to say here, right? But man, but it
hmm
was that was something. And then you get the idea that Dale Jr. has told a lot of these stories on his podcast about where when he shows up, but he had no idea his dad had any interest at all. It's his uncle who really
Right.
pushes. it's the Uries, his cousin
Yeah.
and his uncle, and that's why would we spend money on some other Yahoo to tear up our equipment when we can let your
Your
son
son do
tear it up,
it.
you know? And so you
Oh,
get, they're the ones that believe in him. And, it's Tony, Senior, who's, his uncle, and Junior is his cousin, but he talks about it's like a father and a brother to me.
yeah.
Those two guys, they're so close. And so, they go out and he starts off terrible and, the wreck, um, at Daytona in his first Daytona race. I did not remember this either. He's like
Mm-mm.
he goes flying. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I knew I had heard Dale Jr. say he is not there on Sunday for that race in '98. I didn't know why, and part of it was he was upset that he in the first
Done
race in
that.
this car he went
Yeah.
flying
Flying.
upside down, and it kind of really rattled him. You could tell
Yeah.
in that interview, and so he's like, "I'm out of here." So he's not there. He's not there for that Daytona 500 the next day,
Wild.
but they do a good job of talking about that one. And I get it. I've heard Kelly and Dale talk about that they want to. There's the other documentaries that have talked about other things, but there's an iconic story from that day. They've even made, I think, a whole documentary about the penny that was taped to, it was
Right.
glued,
It's glued on
to the
the, yeah.
dash, and it's
Yep.
it's an awesome story, and there is no mention, and it's kind of like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, everybody knows about this. I was like, do they?
Right.
If you're
Right.
you're trying to reach people, because that's a legit
That
non
now this is
intimidator iron head.
I remember the penny. I don't
Yeah,
at this moment as I'm sitting here talking, I remember it was a thing. Was it
yeah,
given to him by like a
yeah.
pediatric?
She had maybe spinal bifida or
Yeah.
something like that, and she told me this was her lucky
Yucky
penny.
Penny gave it to
Yeah,
him.
and she's just in a meet and greet type
Yeah.
thing, and he got down there with her, and he's really close, and she told him that this was the penny that he needed to win, and he's like, well,
All
and
right.
he did not even mess around. He told them to glue that thing to the dash. It's apparently still on the car
Right.
today, and it was just like this amazing story because he had changed.
Yeah.
He had his fourth child, I think, in
Right.
'89, and
Which that was a
this.
big part of this episode, right?
Yeah, where you start he starts becoming a better father. And
Yeah.
I think even his sister, Dale Jr.'s aunt talked about he's a much better father now than he was with the
which
original kids.
which then they
Yeah.
say that and then they transition to Junior and Kelly talking about how like the jealousy that was seeping through watching,
Yes.
him
Yes.
raise this new child in front of them, which
It's
is it's
it's
crazy. It's crazy,
it's
but like
yep.
it was one of
Yep.
those clearly a moment in his life and Dale's life where, a light a switch happened. A light
Yeah.
was turned on and like just a realization. Maybe it was the age of
Maybe. It's
knowing
got to
he
have
was getting
something to do
older,
with it.
right?
Yeah.
Seeing the
Yeah.
step that he's losing, and just wanting to be more present and aware because I think, not a great father for their early years, but like that is where it takes a turn. And I
Seems to.
maybe it sounds cheesy as hell. Maybe it's also the weight of Daytona, right? Not
Could be.
having it like that coming off of his back. Like just a
Yeah.
lot happens in this period towards the end of this episode where like all of a
Yeah.
sudden this the
You had
more sort of heroic version of Dale, the one that you
the
want to
the
immortalize,
nicer
right?
version, the
Is
no
there.
longer,
Yeah.
it's not really the jerk from the first.
Right.
Yeah, right. But
Yep.
you had this awesome, they do the junior highlights. Granted, this is called Earnhardt. It's not called
Yeah.
Earnhardt Junior, and I get it, but that was some good stuff too. And I thought this episode it ended, where he basically says, don't let the day go by without letting those you love know about it,
Yeah.
because he's talking about he'd love to be able to tell his father, and it was like, ooh, that's
Because
some good, because
'Cause you know. Uh,
you know what's up there.
Yeah,
So
that's for me watching. This was, and I texted you about this as I was going through it. I watched 3 episodes, and I had to stop. I could have gone
yeah,
because they were all out at that point, and like
yeah,
I knew I had to stop because I knew what we were in for, and I just having that be sort of like those 3 episodes were perfect together,
yeah.
and you feel like you could make an entire separate 3-hour documentary on what's
For the
ahead.
last, yeah,
And it was just like, yeah, there was a happy moment. I wanted to end there, but
yeah.
and it's not a full story. It's not a fully painted picture without everything that comes up in that last episode.
Without the last episode, and they don't even mess around, from the
No,
beginning.
no,
I think the first shot of that last episode is Kelly breaking down, talking about how good of a relationship she had with her mom or
Yep.
whatever, and as she'd always wanted that with her dad, and it's kind of like getting you set up for
Everything
this.
ahead.
This is gonna be rough.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. You knew part four was going to be heavy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the end of the movie when you go see Titanic. You know what happens in Titanic, right?
The ship
You,
sinks? You're
yes,
kidding me.
yeah,
They hit an iceberg?
yeah.
Oh no.
You know what's going on, and like I say, it started kind of rough when you see Kelly. I think it's really the
Yeah.
only time she truly breaks down in the dock, and but there's a lighthearted moment in a very heavy situation, and it's from Waltrip. It's from Daryl, and he's talking about how Dale had to know that he was one of the best drivers ever, and Daryl goes, but he wasn't, and
Yeah.
it's just like this little
Yeah.
dig, like
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, he wasn't on par with the rest of us, with the Patties and the Waltrips. It's such a great little
But he's got
Daryl, and it's like,
the other thing I love about it too is him bringing up the fact that he doesn't hire his brother to be on DEI, if not as just a
oh,
jab to get back at him.
wow, how wild is that?
That's
It's
how
like,
what he took out of it. To me, I
oh
always
man,
like knowing that there was a rivalry. Obviously, again, like I said at the top, not knowing how big it was. Like to me,
yeah.
it felt, if anything, more like hey, we had it so rough. Let me just like this is an olive branch to your family. I never viewed
Uh,
it as like another jab in the ribs at getting back
it's
at him. That's
crazy. So I
oh
I I
man,
don't want to I don't want to take us down a different path, and we'll talk about all the other documentaries. But there is an incredible documentary. Michael actually wrote a book about all of this.
hmm
He called it Blink of an Eye
mm,
because everything changed in a blink of an eye, and they turned it into an amazing documentary. Now, granted, it's a Michael Walter documentary, but it's
yeah.
heavily Dale Earnhardt documentary, and a lot of the footage that they show with Mikey with his hair braided or hanging out on the boat. They're all fishing and he's suntan and all that. All that's from that documentary as well. And in that documentary, Daryl takes a shot too because, Michael lives with Richard Petty, which is his number one rival for a while. And then he goes to work for Dale Earnhardt, which is his other rival. It's like, man, they're always taking shots at me. It's like, it's all about Daryl. I was like,
Right.
man,
Like that's knowing this is about Earnhardt. Like the other thing
yes,
I got out of it was like, man, Daryl holds grudges.
there's a lot of Daryl in there.
Right? There's a lot of
Yes.
Daryl, and he just like what I will give him credit for is we didn't get one boogity boogity. Let's go
No, no,
racing, boys. Thank God. But
no.
like he is very curmudgeony, and
It's
it's
something.
like he's been
Yeah.
that way his whole life.
Yeah, must be. It's still, it's not in this episode, but the one where he thinks Budweiser and Kentucky Fried Chicken and the Lord. It was like that is NASCAR, baby. It's like fried chicken,
Oh my
beer, and
God.
Jesus, man. You can't.
Let's
That should be
go.
on that should be on a T-shirt, right? Those are the three pillars of being
The
a
name of
Southerner.
beer,
Jesus, yeah,
Jesus,
Jesus,
and Kentucky
beer,
Fried
and
Chicken.
and fried chicken, baby. So good, man. It's like it was just like it's like, oh
Oh,
yeah, let me thank my sponsors. It's like I'm gonna thank beer and chicken. Oh, and the Lord.
God.
It's like, oh, that's great. So Daryl's a huge part of this. He's an outspoken guy, right?
hmm
And they definitely did have run-ins. And he talks about it sounds like they uh, at the end are back
Fine.
to being yes. It seems like Daryl has a clean conscience where some of the others, and we find out some of the ones very close to him do not have
Right.
these same, you know,
Right.
stuff that Daryl seems that yes, they
They
went
had
at it and it's as big as its biggest rival, but it seems that, you know,
That reminded me of another moment between them, and it was the year that Earnhardt finished eighth. And the other thing I love too, they showed a lot of the banquet clips, of like
yes,
getting the trophies and this and
dude.
that, like handed the winners checks and stuff. And Dale goes and accepts his eighth place check,
Yeah.
and it's $40,000.
40 grand.
He's upset, and he's like, well, I just can't wait till I'm sitting in that seat next year. And we're
I want the
pointing
I
at
want the
DW.
I want the big
I want the
check
big
over
one,
there.
right? And then what does he do?
Yeah,
He goes and wins it.
he
Right?
does.
He does. So just, oh
He
man,
does.
that's
So
just so
yeah,
good.
but they have an interesting
They do.
relationship.
They
It's
do.
it's you know, and I could see how upset he would be too. He wasn't his best friend, obviously. We talked about Neil Bonnet. Neil
Yeah.
Bonnet's in there, and he doesn't even go to Neil's
The
funeral and stuff like that.
parallels, the
Oof.
parallels for how the both of them too, right? Like the same
Yeah,
track.
it's brutal.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
Like I knew
You
the
know.
Bonnet story. But it's
Hmm.
like until you're in that moment watching it back to back play out like that, it's like wow, just the crazy how
Yeah,
similar and just like tragic it is.
and he does a TV show, so they have all that footage of him too, all the
Mm-hmm.
B-roll of, we're just gonna be sitting here BSing. What are we doing? We're just sitting here BSing.
Yes.
That's all we're doing. So,
Getting them to walk down the
it's like
garage, right?
it's like we're not.
Where are
They're
we
not even gonna
walking?
show what we're. They're not even gonna show what we're talking. They're
No.
gonna have a voiceover, and we're
Voiceover.
just gonna be sitting there, and it's like, and then he starts talking about the car. And it's like, oh, I've got a new car and all this stuff, and and you're like, ah, and then he loses him, and they're like, the whole world goes. It's like, how do you not go to your best friend's funeral? And he just couldn't do it. It's like, man, it's just,
It's like he didn't want to
whew.
believe it. Like
I
it
guess
wasn't,
it's what
it
it
would have been
was,
real. It was like that finality, the closure to the situation, and he
but
didn't want to believe
but
it.
man, that was tough. But and then
Hmm.
you know that they spend a ton of time on the race,
Yeah.
and we all know that race backwards, forwards. Just know what happens. But you forget, like, we all know the ending, but the Tony Stewart wreck that happened.
That
If
always stuck in my mind. Like,
if what happened, if it didn't happen, if to Dale, that would be what we remembered, because it's the most amazing wreck you will ever see. It nearly kills him. They nearly lose two people
yeah,
that day. He is taken to the hospital as well, to the point he tells the story of being there in the emergency room himself when they bring him in, and they're in the same emergency room. And but the video, and that's what always stood out. Is the video of Tony Stewart's wreck is 1,000 times worse than
right.
what you see from Dale's
That's
wreck.
that's also why it's like the shockingness of it happening to who it happened to is one
It's
thing, but like
crazy.
made what 10 laps before it,
It's,
maybe
it's
like not
20,
even 20, like is right there.
20
They're
laps
so
before.
close to
They are
red
so
flag it,
close together.
right?
They red
And like
flag it.
the fact that that's what that looked like, and
Hmm.
everyone not unscathed, of course, as you're mentioning,
Right.
but like
Yeah.
everyone made
But
it out.
but
But then that,
he
like
yeah.
that's what it just
You know,
doesn't look
it
bad.
his wreck, Tony's wreck is so horrible, and it takes off. It's something like 16 cars.
Mm,
It's ridiculous. It's it's not half the field, but it feels
no,
like half the field. And he's flying over people and landing and flying back up. It is unreal. And you're like, and he doesn't just walk away. He's fine. I actually think he races the next day, but they just precaution him. But he does go to the hospital, and you're like, oh
yeah.
wow, that's the big one, right?
The
And then, man, goodness gracious.
the one thing, and I know we'll again, I feel like we keep saying this, but we'll get
Hmm.
get to it on what's missed out of this.
Yeah.
Um, one person and I don't, they may exist out there interviews with him, but Ken Schrader
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the guy that goes and finds him, the first one
He
to the
does.
car.
Yeah.
You don't hear from him. I know they show him go and he talks to Michael, Victory Lane, and that's where he first hears it, and you can see they mentioned it in the doc that it's where his mood instantly changes and he goes from like
Yeah.
joyous and celebratory to the
Blank.
photo, and it's like a blank face. It's like he's not there.
He is gone.
He's the guy that saw him and I mean pushed him around turn four, up in the corner. So you don't know
Yeah.
like how long did he see it? Is that why he ran over it? But like his perspective on all of it, and I don't know if it's out of you know privacy or wanting to not say what he saw, that sort of thing. But like he's got a point of view that I would have
No one
loved to
else
have
has.
heard.
Yeah. And I will say this, he's told the story to Junior on his podcast, but he won't tell him what he saw.
Yeah,
He's never told anybody
that
what he saw. But all you have to do is look at the reaction, and he saw something horrible.
immediately
And
waving.
like, we all, I rode motorcycles and stuff. We all wear
Mhm.
full face helmets now. The fact he doesn't have if he'd had a full face, Ken would have just, it would not have
Yeah,
registered because it would have been covered. But Dale still wearing that classic open face, and he comes around there to let the window down, and he sees something that
immediately.
nobody else wanted. And what was incredible, and once again, we'll hit on Dale Jr.'s podcast is therapy for him, and Dale Jr. told him, he's like, man, I know how close you and my father were. I wouldn't have wanted anybody else in the world. He goes, I hate you had to go through it, but I'm glad it was you who went through it because I knew because he is protected. He's never told anybody what he saw. He's never sold his story, so to speak. And Junior was like, it's very respectful. He loves Kent Schrader, and the fact that he hasn't told it is
Hmm.
big to him because he has a perspective that no one else has. No one else, even Junior talks about getting there and not going in the room. He said he
Couldn't go in.
stood at the door. And I talked about this beginning. This is Imagine. These are legit movie makers, right?
Yeah.
And there's an incredible shot where he talks about he walked in and the doctors are still working on him, but there was no shot.
Yeah.
And he said one of the doctors told him that he was gone. And as soon as they do, they go to that shot of him fishing, and
Hmm.
he's fishing, and he does the turn, and he makes the Dale Earnhardt smile, and I melted, man. I was like, these dudes are pro movie makers because they're gonna hit you in the feels,
Yeah.
because you're sitting there like, yeah, he's gone for us, but here he is fishing with this huge smile on his face, and it was this beautiful moment. I was like, that's a pro
Yeah.
filmmaking right there. But I wrote, it's a beautiful scene, but I said brutal. Beautiful but brutal, and because then Junior goes, he couldn't go in, and
Another moment.
gosh,
This episode's full of them. There's you talk
yeah,
about beautiful movie making. Marley and Me is the only film
oh
I had to muffle audible, just like wails because of
yeah,
that story. This
yeah,
was a close second,
yeah,
for what it did to me. But the other heavy scene for me was towards the end, and it's getting back to right before the was it Pepsi 400? I think they still
yeah.
call it that, right? And the
They
July
did back
race.
then. Yeah,
Um, and everyone knows that. Well, I imagine everyone that's a NASCAR fan knows that story because it's
sure.
the first time back at Daytona.
Yeah,
It's a big. They get a week off before that race, right? So
back
it's a
then they
little bit of
did.
break,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
A little bit of time off in between, and it's got a great finish. Junior
right,
wins the race, but
right.
it's everything that like great storybook moment, and
Yeah,
how it just again just a story that's full of full circle moments.
yep.
The week before, he could have
Oh,
gone anywhere. He could have gone anywhere, done anything, hung out with anyone. And what
yeah.
does Junior decide to do but get back to that track and not even like get in a what did they say? They said they had not a Subaru,
A
Suburban.
Suburban. Yeah,
And they're driving to Daytona, and he's like, "I'm gonna see if I can get on this damn
and
thing
they break in, man.
and get into the track."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, he explains how it's something he didn't want to have. He didn't know how he was going to react because it's his
Right.
he left, didn't go back, hadn't been back since February, and just wanted to see what the feels would be, and not even just gets into the track and drives around, drives to the freaking spot,
He does.
and gets out of the car, walks off by himself, and doesn't get too detailed on what it was like, but he just said he felt like it was, just a weight lifted or
Yeah.
something. Like
It
it's
was
a
very,
weird
yeah.
feeling for him, but
Yes.
you know, clear that, just a very cathartic moment. He didn't want to have that experience in front of other people. So he
Exactly.
did it that week prior. That's why I think, subconsciously, whether he knew it going into it or not, that's
Yeah.
why he did it when he did it. But like that to me was heavy because he had that
Yeah.
personal moment then, right? Never
He
went into the
very
room, but he went back to the scene.
he did.
And,
He said something very profound there. It's like I shouldn't be mad at Daytona. It's like
mm-mm.
my dad loved this place,
Yep.
and he was like he was very hesitant to say it. I think he even said I don't even know if I can say this because it's not going to make
Sense
me.
to,
It's not going to. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But it was even more special because he had passed there, and it was like
Yeah.
you know, um, I do say there was there's a great story. I think it was in the previous episode that ties back into this. And I always wondered, he takes his buddies on that week before, and they're out there. They break into Daytona and they're stealing. And I always wondered if it was the same, in his word, MFers that he had run off from from the trailer in
Yeah.
episode
When dad
three.
shows up in and he's get the
Yeah,
fuck
yeah,
out of
yeah. I was
here.
like, is this the same? Is this
Same
the
crew.
same crew that
I
that
have
left
to
their
imagine.
that left their shoes, when the scary figure opens the door.
Oh my
And
God.
so I was sitting there, as like tying back, it's like, is this the same guys?
Right?
But yeah, yeah, but what a scene, man. It was just,
Every
yeah.
every bit of it, like to your point, like they knew what they were doing. They
They
knew,
did. They are
you know,
pro filmmakers, man.
it
And you,
oof,
gosh, you get the horrible, the revelation that Kelly talks about, that she had not talked to him in 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Three
And
weeks.
it was like Dale tells that story about how he has closure. He is good, he is like, it's profound. I shouldn't be mad at Daytona, all this stuff. And then he said, Kelly doesn't have the
Have that
same
same
experience I
experience.
do.
Yep. And he hates
And
it
it,
for her.
and
And
he
yeah.
hates it for her. And it's like, oh my gosh. I wrote down, that's just gut wrenching. That
And there's
oh,
nothing, there's nothing you can do or say
no,
to
no,
fix that.
no. It's
And for
just,
as much as she's done for him, to
yeah.
like be there for him, to give up her life and go to military school with him, to you know do what they've done since and found a business with him. And
Yeah.
I mean, he can't, for anything in him, return that in tenfold to
Yeah.
solve the kind of pain and angst that she must be going through, knowing
Oh,
she won't have
brutal.
closure.
Nope. Never. Never. And it was
Mm-mm.
like, gosh, man, this is rough. And obviously, like, you see who she is today, just in the postscript. It's amazing. It's what she was able
Hmm.
to do with his company. And,
Right.
she
You know what?
she
You
kept him
mentioned
on
that,
the rails.
not to like
Yeah.
spin off, but you mentioned her work on that company. They were going back through, like, I saw them. They didn't really talk about it. They
Hmm.
mentioned her with marketing and things like that for
Hmm.
the Dale Earnhardt DEI. And she's sitting there talking to the woman over the back of the computer, and I can see they've got the membership cards. I tried to find it, I couldn't. It was the Dale Earnhardt,
Ah,
the DE Club, and I
yes,
have that card
the new
somewhere.
hard
Like,
plastic ones that are super
right?
cool, as she said.
And the
Yes.
cups and all that. Like, I have a
Oh,
cup on a
it's
shelf
awesome.
downstairs, so like it was awesome to me. You have that. I
Yeah.
jealous of the amount of just the locality and the
Sure.
local connection you have to it. But seeing that was the closest I could get to possibly,
Well, yeah,
being there,
your
seeing those
credit
cups.
card, that's incredible.
Right?
Now that you say that, there were things that I watched, and I think it was back in episode 2, and I completely forgot about this, but you forget about some of these things, you're like, when you were a kid, that you did, and things like that. And, I do. I have the locale, the shop is still, 8 minutes
Stone's
that
throw.
way, still there,
Throw a
and
baseball. Uncle
yeah,
Rico could throw a
and
football over the
he
mountains for
could
the.
throw it, and they highlighted when they moved to Welcome in, 86 or 87, whenever it was, away from the shop I was telling you about on Gumtree and Old Lexington. That place is enormous now. They kept buying property. It was a small facility, and now it goes back. If you Google Map RCR, it goes way back.
Mm,
The engine shop is here. Colleague Racing is all the way in the back. You got this huge campus. But there was a great shot there of, in episode 2. Sorry to get backtrack, but I forgot about this story, until I watched this. Was they were switching. Wrangler. He
yeah,
talked about. I did not know this.
the
Wrangler got
unveiling.
sold by
Yep.
to Vanity Fair. I think we're making, maybe underwear and stuff like that. And so, like, they're going to get out of this, and we need
Yep.
new stuff. And so they showed the unveiling. Well, the unveiling was on October the 24th of 1987, and it was not at a Cup race. It was at a Busch Series race, which is the Xfinity Series now, and it was done at Rockingham. And who was there that day? Yours truly.
Get the
My
heck
my
out of here.
my parents would not go. The Cup races were very crowded, and so you
Yeah.
would go on Saturday. And
'Cause-
Rockingham back then was just a little over 2 hours away. It's actually closer now because they built
Yeah.
interstates down there. But, Rockingham just a month ago at Easter was back. They used COVID. They used COVID money to help revitalize that track, and they got the Xfinity Series back. But on that day, we went, and it was a big deal because, like, they would have all sorts of different races. I think the Cup Series may practice
Yeah.
beforehand. Then you had the
Yep.
Bush race, and then you had this awesome go kart racing. And these dudes were running. over 100 miles an hour on the back
Wow.
of on these go-karts. And that's the thing that sticks out. But that day, they rolled that thing out and like, hey, this is what's going to be our car next year. Well, I am there
That
that
is
day.
so awesome.
Is that not amazing?
So
I had
awesome.
completely forgotten about that. And when I saw that unveiling, I went, I
I
am
was
there that day. I forgot all about that.
You're all over this documentary, man. The
Dude, I
pass in the
was,
grass.
man. I was like passing the grass at UNCW, at the unveiling. I
That's
was like,
so
man, this is
awesome.
this is amazing. I hate to be that name drop. I did this, but
No,
I was there that day as a kid, and I just could not believe, like, oh
that's
my gosh,
fantastic.
I had forgotten all about that. They did. They showed off the car before they put it out in Daytona that year. So, but
That's
yeah,
wild.
it was so cool. And there was something else as the postscript was interesting, and
Yeah.
you had some really cool call outs, but there was one interesting thing. It showed there was a modern day image of Dale and Kelly, and they were just walking, and it's from this year's Daytona 500, and they had entered their car.
Hmm.
The first Junior Motorsports Cup car had been entered at the Daytona 500. They made the show. Justin Allgaier, the country guy. I can't remember his name, but he makes whiskey.
Stapleton,
Yeah, that's it.
Chris
Yeah,
Stapleton.
Chris
Yeah.
Chris Stapleton,
That is
Traveler's
Traveler's
Whiskey.
Whiskey. Yep. Yep.
Traveler's Whiskey's on the car, but if you look close as he's walking away in that voiceover, Dale has an Osterlin hat, which was the company that Dale
Hmm.
Sr. had broke in with. It's a beautiful moment of
That's
just
awesome.
like this full circle because he comes as a rookie. I think he had been to Daytona before, but he comes to Daytona as a rookie in '79 with Osterlin.
Hmm.
And what does Dale have as their first attempt? And they made the field. He's got that Osterlin hat on, and it was like, dude, that's a goosebump type moment.
That's so
And
cool.
I don't know if everybody picks up on that. I nerd
Right.
out on. I love filmmaking. I love film. I
Hmm.
love when they do stuff like that. And he loves nostalgia as well.
He
And
knows.
he wore that hat proudly all weekend, but it was perfect, man, as they're showing them finishing up,
Wild
making that film. Yeah.
too,
And so
because the age that he is now, he just turned 50. So now
yeah,
he's officially older than his dad was when he
yeah.
died at the track. So
He
that's got
he
to
made
be,
it. He made it further.
yeah, got to be a
Made it.
weird thing for him
Yeah,
to know that now.
made it further than grandfather, and then made it further than dad. So yeah, yeah. It's something. But yeah, we've vegged out over this,
Whew.
and
I wonder if we like Earnhardt.
yeah.
It's like,
Well, and
oh man,
and once again, it's a Twisted Airs podcast,
yeah,
and it wouldn't be Twisted Airs without doing some Twisted Airs stuff. So I threw a couple of questions
yeah.
to throw at you, just that we could,
Let's
maybe,
go.
yeah. And so the first question I have is, in your point of view, you've got,
Yeah.
that's a signed Dale Earnhardt hat. You're a fan as well. It's like, did they miss anything that you know of that you remember that you would have loved to have seen in there?
I mean, I think nothing stands out, and I know
Mhm.
we spoiler alert, we talked a little bit beforehand to figure this out. You
Mhm.
have some great call outs.
Mhm.
What I would have liked to have seen more of is, the right, like the dive into the gore. They did a little bit, right? Of sort of like how his demeanor changed and things like that. And like
Yeah.
a little bit of a rivalry. They touch on it briefly with Gordon and the Rainbow Warriors
Yes.
and that sort of thing. But like that aspect of they got really deep into like Bodine and
Sure.
Waltrip in the early
Waltrip.
years, and Waltrip obviously being a big part of it. Gordon's even a part of it.
Very little
Very
though, but you're
right.
right.
But
You're
they could
right. That
have. I
they
feel
just
like they
kind of
had a lot
gloss
of
over it.
tape on the floor that they cut in the editing room that was, about his relationship with him,
Yeah.
and they could have made the connect. I feel like they could have made a connection between DW and Earnhardt and Gordon and Earnhardt, and like the similarities there, and just
Yeah.
the also the differences, and how it impacted him. Did it impact his psyche? They talk about it a little bit, his psyche and the getting old and
Very
losing a
little.
step,
Yeah.
and but like
The Wonder Boy
that's an
aspect
area,
and
right?
stuff like that. Yeah.
An aspect that
The
felt
the
like they could have
iconic
gone
the
deeper
iconic
into.
milk
Yeah,
toast,
yeah,
and stuff like that. The only thing I'll say, and like I say, I think I mentioned this earlier. Junior was talking about this is a new documentary, and they're going to hit stuff. There is a full 1 hour documentary on the rivalry between
yeah.
Earnhardt and Gordon. I think it's called Unrivaled, and
Hmm.
NASCAR did it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it's great. It has everything that you need. But if you're going to make the quintessential
Yeah.
Earnhardt documentary, it probably should have more Gordon stuff in there because
It was big. I
it
mean, those
it
fan
was
bases were.
massive.
I had, don't tell the wife that I had a second grade girlfriend that was a huge Gordon fan,
There
and
you
it was
go.
like that's our hatred of like
Exactly.
Gordon and Earnhardt is actually opposites attract in
Yeah.
second grade. Like,
Yeah.
as much as they can. It was hilarious because they were such just different. It was this California kid,
Polar
right?
opposites.
Right? It's
Yes.
just a California kid versus the still blue collar, just North Carolinian, and it's just an aspect that felt overlooked. But yeah,
It did. But
same question back to
yeah.
you.
Yeah, I've got unfortunately, this is I don't want to bash this because I do like this, but there is a lot of stuff that you kind of gloss over, the Childress stuff, the
Yeah.
iconic Wrangler stuff, and it mentions that he quit. Osterland sells for $2 million. Is that great scene? And
Whew.
Stacy got the
Yeah.
cigar. And the Jim Stacy stuff is interesting because he's a shady character, and Dale knew it. That's why he gets out. He's like, I don't want anything to do with this, but they make it seem like, oh yeah, he just quits, and then he raced the very next week, and he raced the very next week with Childress,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
he
the way it's
finishes.
presented, it felt like an end of season
Yeah,
thing. He's like,
it
"Ah, I'm just gonna
did. It
take," and
felt
then
like, oh
boom.
yeah, I'm gonna, but he races the finishes that season with Childress. They race, I think, the last 11 races are with Childress in the Wrangler number 3, and he gets to the end of the year, and then he goes to Bud Moore, and they mention it briefly, very briefly, that he's
Yeah.
at Bud Moore, but he's at Bud Moore for 2 years, and he drives the Wrangler, drum roll, Ford.
Yeah.
It's the number 15 Ford. It's like, let's just gloss over the fact that Dale Earnhardt, the most iconic,
Chevy driver.
Chevy guy,
Right.
GM guy, worked for GM Goodwrench, was driving for Ford for 2 years. So, and granted, I guess, they can't go into everything, but I always thought that was interesting that he actually drives for Ford for a couple of years. So,
Yeah.
they didn't put that. There's a lot of great, he mentions, they showed the video of him going to his dealership,
Hmm.
Dale Earnhardt Chevrolet. And Kerry works at Dale Earnhardt Chevrolet, and Dale Jr. works at Dale Earnhardt Chevrolet. And there's some great stories of, Dale eventually gets fired from Dale
Yeah.
Earnhardt Chevrolet. And he tells this great story about, he goes, you see the name on that board, one day I'm going to come back here and I'm going to, take you out or whatever. It's an incredible story that I was
Oh
like,
my God.
man, for a heavy documentary, this is heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's heavy. As kids talk about not the best
Oof.
father, and we
Right.
know he's going to die in a horrific way. Some lighthearted, funny stuff. It would be
You know what would have
welcome.
been interesting too is his last win. Like some of that stuff, the final
Dude.
years,
The
and
last win is one of the most amazing
is
that
that
he
the
does.
Talladega coming back
That's
from
the
18th to first,
three
or
laps,
yeah,
and yeah, three
just
laps,
unbelievable. They
18.
mention it. It's mentioned because
It's
Junior does the same thing, right? Comes back.
yeah,
He had a moment
yeah,
of
yeah, he passes 6 cars where
right.
Dad had
Yeah,
done 8. Yeah,
right.
but it's like, yeah, that there's some of that stuff that's like, yeah, I get it, and I've heard Junior say, yeah, we know he's a good driver. We wanted to tell other stories, and I understand it, but if it's called Earnhardt, it should have a lot of that stuff in there. But I will say this, and Junior's podcast is incredible if you've never listened, but I want to say a couple of weeks ago, they don't mention this, but 2 weeks before Daytona in 2001, Dale Senior and Junior drive in the 24 hours of Daytona.
The Le Mans.
Yeah,
Right,
Daytona.
right.
It's a
Daytona
Rolex.
version. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
would be the Daytona version of the
yeah.
24 hours. Yeah, and so they run a Corvette, and
Right.
the original team, the principal and the other 2 drivers, met on his podcast for like the first time,
Wow.
and they just told stories about and this is 2 weeks before he dies, and it was amazing. It was
Forgot
amazing
they did
stuff.
that.
Everybody does, and so I mean, it was such a cool story, and they were telling stories that Junior didn't even know, and it's incredible. And so there was stuff like that I'm just like,
Why didn't we?
gosh,
Yeah.
what that's such a good, and there's plenty of footage of video from that race and all this stuff, and they actually finished fourth overall, and their team wins. So it's like that was one of those things. It was like, I get it. You can't put every single thing. We're
Mm.
already at 4 hours and 10 minutes. We can't put everything. But that was one of the things I thought. Those are good things. But the second question I'll ask you is, where were you when you found out?
You could probably, I think we may have talked about this because
Okay.
it was on the NASCAR episode, but I it was later that night, and it was at
Mm-hmm.
home. I was at home. I'm 2001, so do a little math. 12. I don't turn 13 till later that month, depending on
Mm-hmm.
when the five. It was the 19th, right? February
Eight,
19th, 20,
it's
2001.
18 somewhere around there. Yeah,
18.
yeah.
So
Four
I was
plus four, 18.
12 going on
February 18th.
13. 12 going on 13, and I remember my aunt who had a career in sports broadcasting and
Oh
worked at
wow.
CNN for a time, calls the house and was like, "Hey, have you heard?"
Ugh.
And no one knew. Like, what the hell? Like, I mean, we saw it, we watched a little bit, turned it off,
And
and
then they
go
went
away.
away. Yeah, exactly.
Um, so like calls the house because my dad too. Like, I'm only a big NASCAR fan, big Earnhardt fan because of my dad.
Yeah.
So
Right.
calls the house and was like, "Hey, did you hear?" And we were like,
Oh,
"No." Like, then she tells us, and you're like, "What?" Like, there's absolutely no way. And then it's like all of a sudden back on the news, and like your world sinks as a 12, 13-year-old kid. You're like, my God, this guy that was an intimidator and invincible and all this stuff is now just all first race of the year. You're looking forward to a great year ahead. They
got
just
a
finished
whole year
one,
ahead.
two, a whole
Yes.
team, right? A brand new team.
Yes.
And, you saw them out front, the Daytona 500 for a majority of that race. Yeah, there's an accident, but boom, year's over. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my God. Um, but yeah,
Brutal.
that's where I was at home, surrounded by family,
Okay.
thankfully. So, how about
I
yourself?
see. So 2000, I'm 27. We'd been married for a little over a year. We got married in late 99. And on Sunday nights, we would play basketball at the neighborhood gym that I had grown up in.
Mhm.
This gym is 1,000 years old. All I can think of is like you think about Hickory, from Hoosiers, that old gym. Well,
Hmm,
that's what it was. And so, but
it's
they just kept
incredible.
it. You could rent it out, and we rented it out on Sunday nights and just play pickup games. And we're playing. If it race back then, races started at 1.
Yeah,
So the race is over, and we would meet at 6 or 6:30, whenever it was, and go play ball. And we're playing ball, and I we had cell phones, but it wasn't as big a deal. And our buddy's wife drove over there, and she just busts in the door, and she's like, "Dale Earnhardt is dead," and it stopped our game. Like, what?
what? Like, no.
What? And
Yeah,
so that's where we were. So it's still weird
wild.
but gosh, I mean, still, and once again,
It is one of those moments. It's like one
it
of those that
is.
you're gonna remember where you were.
You're going
That
to remember where
challenge,
you
well,
were.
not for me for this one, but like my mom always tells me about the Challenger and
Sure.
you know
Challenger,
2001,
9/11, and all that
9/11, right?
stuff. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it just, oh man,
Uh, well,
wild.
before we go into, like,
Yeah.
if we liked it or not, the last question I wanted to ask is, what was your biggest takeaway from the doc? You talked about it. You were a big fan, but you're a younger fan. What was your biggest takeaway from?
Yeah, man, it's kind of one of those, the old saying, you don't want to meet your heroes,
Boom,
right? Right.
bam.
It,
We're on the
it's
same page.
it's a deep look into like the side of him you didn't want to know about,
Yep.
and I think it was spoiler. I think it was incredibly well
Yeah.
done. I would watch it again.
Yeah.
Probably will watch it again, but it's like, man, you just wish you didn't know all that about
Yep.
him. It like spoils the mystique of the Intimidator, and it's you wish you didn't know it, but it's also one of those like, hey, we all are, we have our we're
Balls.
fallible, right? We've
We
got
are.
our fallacies and just our things that we wish we could improve upon about ourselves, and he even talks
Yeah.
about it, right?
He does.
Wish he was a better dad, could be there
Yeah.
for them and whatnot. So um yeah, I don't know if I could put it any other way. It's like
Yeah.
I'm glad I watched it, but I almost at the same time wish it wasn't a thing.
So I say almost the exact same thing. I wrote down my answer, and it was much more about, I tried. I feel the exact same way you do, but I tried to put a positive spin on
Yeah,
it. And my positive spin was that Dale Earnhardt Jr. went through a terrible childhood, but he is such an amazing person as a
yeah.
man.
Hmm.
He has his faults as well, but
He's the Earnhardt that learned, right?
he is.
Yeah.
He is. And it's like, and they were talking about he was never going to be his dad, and they put all this pressure on him and the 76
Oh,
wins and the
yeah.
7 championships. And it's like
The
he's never going to get that.
appearances he had to go on
Yes,
that were his dad, like the fan, but even the fan base, like that to me, I had a little bit of self guilt in that as I'm watching it. Like,
yeah,
man, yeah, I did become a fan of his because his dad pat. Like, I thought I would naturally, obviously, become one, having
sure,
been. We've told the story. I had his first race and all
that's
that sort
right.
of stuff, and um, wearing his hat. Like, it's
Yeah,
just it's but still, like all of that was just thrust on him. It's not like
yep.
he asked for it. One most popular driver. It's in the post show
Over
notes,
and
right?
over. 15 was
15
it
years in
15
a row.
years? Yeah,
So it's
but the
just
and
unbelievable.
he as a kid always was like never going to be up to his dad. He talks about it when he's a kid. He's like
Mhm.
he's this iconic figure. And I would venture, yes, to say he has gone places that his dad would have never gone.
Mm-mm.
His dad would have never been able to do the podcasting type
No.
stuff. His dad would have never gotten to these places. And so my biggest takeaway is I feel the exact same way. I didn't want to find out some of that stuff, but it also gave like Dale Jr. is like
A
he's the
lot more.
win in
Yeah.
this,
Oh,
and Kelly, they are to come from what they did.
yeah.
And it was powerful, so,
Yeah. It was good
so
stuff.
so yeah, your review,
Yeah.
you know,
I'd watch it again if I were doing
yeah,
stars here. I mean, truthfully, like you know the names behind it and the names that were on it and in it. If it was a 5-star rating, 2 thumbs
yeah,
up,
yeah,
all of the above. Like I really enjoyed it, and like the
yeah,
emotions it pulled out, I don't think you could give it a bad review knowing the way I reacted and
right.
just sort of what it did. The roller coaster it took you on.
It did, and it doesn't hide. It's got warts and all in there,
Hmm. Yeah, it does.
and it's very, very open that this is not going to be a glowing. This
Mm-mm.
is the most perfect dude ever.
Right.
Look at what he did. No,
Mm-mm.
it is not, and
Nope.
and and you have to respect that. Like you say, you sometimes don't want to find out how the sausage is made, so to speak, and you find this out, but it's very real, and there's just so many. We talked about so many amazing scenes and stuff, but I agree. I think it was great. I will say this, it's it's the most recent, but there's so many, uh, other Earnhardt documentaries. I talk about Blink of the Eye with Michael, and that Unrivaled with Earnhardt and Gordon. I'll say this: it's like the the podcast that Dale Jr. does is great. It has a lot of these stories, but he did one in 2023 that he called "Becoming Earnhardt." And Dale Earnhardt wrote, and they don't talk about this either. Dale Earnhardt wrote a column for the Kannapolis newspaper his rookie year. But
Wow.
Dale went and got them all, and he essentially talks about them in his own words. He's reading
Jeez.
his words, and he makes this amazing podcast, and he's going to make a part two for the championship season coming up. But stuff like that they're really complementary pieces to this.
Yeah.
So if you
Yeah.
really want to veg out on Dale Earnhardt, there's a lot of good
This
stuff
is
out there,
There really is, man. And it's been
including the Twisted Errors review of
yeah,
Earnhardt.
right, right this year. And have this
That's
be
right.
part of your rotation.
You can now
And
have this. This is now part of the Earnhardt lore.
well, this was incredible to do.
Yep.
Incredible to watch, incredible to look back on and
Yeah.
dive
Thank
into with you. And
thank you, NASCAR, Dale
yeah,
Jr., Kelly.
all of the above,
Imagine
man.
of Amazon
Ron
for
Howard.
doing that.
Like,
Yes.
so good.
Thank you for
Gave
doing
us
it.
something to talk about. Gave us, the fans out there a little bit of closure, I think, ourselves too
Yeah.
in watching this. So it's
Yeah.
unique to be able to have that now and have it moving forward. But what's your
Absolutely.
review? Have you watched it? Let us know. I would
Yeah.
love
We would
to.
love to hear your feedback. Did it make you like him more, hate him more?
All of the above.
All of the
But
above.
hey, until the next documentary, keep it
Yeah,
twisted.
man.